began our descent into New York's JFK Airport. 10 hours. That was the time I had spent strapped to seat 9A, squeezed between a guy who spent the entire flight arguing with the touchscreen entertainment system and a woman who kicked my shin every time she adjusted her blanket. My body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder, crushed, mangled, and slightly nauseated, but I didn't care. I was almost there. I grabbed my phone, ignoring the 127 unread emails, and instead pulled up the last photo I had of Grayson. It was from 2 weeks ago, a selfie we'd taken in our kitchen in Chicago. He was smiling, looking tired but handsome, in that specific way venture capitalists always look when they're pretending to be normal people. Love you, honey. I whispered to the screen, my finger tracing the curve of his jaw. Wait until you see the surprise. The surprise was me, flying economy from Athens to New York at a moment's notice, because Grayson had casually mentioned over FaceTime that his sister Martha's wedding was going to be a low-key affair and he didn't want me stressing over the long flight. 3 days later, I saw the invitation on his mother's Facebook page, a glossy, professionally photographed save-the-date for a black-tie summer gala at the Sullivan family estate in East Hampton. Low-key, sure. So, I liquidated some of my remaining blue-chip stocks, booked the first flight I could afford, and did something I hadn't done in years. I packed a bag with a plan. I wasn't just Eleanor Sullivan, the stay-at-home wife while her husband played billionaire. I was Eleanor Blake, the corporate litigator who once made a boardroom of senior partners at Sterling and Pierce fall dead silent just by raising an eyebrow. And Eleanor Blake was furious. The plane landed with a jolt that made me grit my teeth. I was out of my seat before the seatbelt sign even turned off, dodging overhead bins and elbowing the slow-moving passengers who treat disembarking like a Sunday stroll. I hit the jet bridge running, my carry-on bouncing against my leg. I needed to reach the Hertz counter, pick up my rental, and drive the 2 hours out to the Hamptons before the reception really kicked off. I had timed it perfectly, except for one thing. By the time I pulled up to the location, a sprawling, column-heavy monstrosity that looked less like a home and more like a Greek temple dedicated to old money, it was already twilight. Strings of fairy lights were draped across the manicured lawn, casting a sickeningly perfect glow over the 100 or so guests mingling in their cocktail attire. I parked the rental, an anonymous Ford Focus that felt like a betrayal compared to my BMW back home, and took a deep breath. I smoothed the travel wrinkles from my Carolina Herrera wrap dress, the one I had bought specifically for this trip, and marched toward the entrance. That was when I saw him. Richard Sullivan, my father-in-law. He was standing there holding a crystal glass of what was probably a 40-year-old Macallan, looking like he'd stepped straight out of a 1995 Brooks Brothers catalog. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his navy blazer sported those leather elbow patches that screamed pretension, and his eyes, the same cold gray as a winter sky, were locked dead on me. My heart skipped a beat. For a second, I thought maybe he was expecting me. Maybe Grayson had told him I was coming. I flashed a smile, pushing up my sunglasses. "Richard," I called out, my voice raspy from the flight. "Surprise!" He didn't move. He didn't smile. He just stood there, taking a slow sip of his scotch as I approached. When I was close enough to see the individual pores on his nose, he finally spoke. "Eleanor." Just my name, dry, without inflection, as if he'd just spotted a stain on the rug. "Hi," I said, my smile faltering. "I know it's a bit last minute, but I got here as fast as I could. Is Grayson inside?" Richard lowered his glass, his gaze sweeping over me with the precision of a butcher inspecting meat. His eyes lingered on the wrinkles of my dress, the faint dark circles under my eyes, the sensible low heels I had worn to sprint through the airport. "Here's the thing," he said, his voice low and clipping with that distinct East Coast elite accent. The invitation was specific. Immediate family only. And while you technically hold a title in this family, you were not on the list. I blinked. The world seemed to tilt on its axis for a second. "What?" "You heard me." He shifted his weight, effectively blocking the path to the door. "This is a private event for the Sullivan family. Not for freeloaders who couldn't even be bothered to book a decent flight." The words hit me like a physical blow. Freeloader. I looked past him, into the glowing warmth of the house. I could hear laughter, the clinking of glasses, the low murmur of a string quartet. I saw Martha, Grayson's younger sister, fluttering around in a cloud of white tulle. And there by the bar was Grayson, My husband. He was talking to someone, his head thrown back in a laugh I knew intimately. Standing right beside him was a woman in a red dress, her hand resting intimately on his forearm. She was young, too young, and she was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that looked suspiciously like the one I had found in Grayson's glove box last month, the one he claimed was a gift for a client. "Richard, please," I said, my voice cracking. I tried to step around him, but he mirrored my movement, his shoulder bumping mine. "Let me pass. Grayson is waiting for me." "Is he really?" Richard arched an eyebrow. "Because I just spoke to him 10 minutes ago, and he failed to mention his wife was going to crash the party. Frankly, Eleanor, you should have called. It's incredibly embarrassing for you to show up unannounced like this. It makes the family look bad." Family? The word tasted like ashes in my mouth. I had spent 12 years trying to be part of this family. 12 years biting my tongue at country club dinners, ignoring their casual classism, pretense were just jokes. And this was my reward. Humiliation. I fumbled for my phone, my hands suddenly slick with sweat. I dialed Grayson's number. It rang once, twice, and went straight to voicemail. Of course. I tried again. Same result. "He's busy," Richard said, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Why don't you head back to the city? I'm sure there's a motel that will take you at this hour." I stared at him, at the man who had walked me down the aisle 12 years ago and patted my shoulder, telling me I was lucky to have snagged his son. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slap that condescending smirk right off his Botox-smooth face. But I didn't. I was Eleanor Blake, and Eleanor Blake didn't make scenes. She built cases. So I took a step back, then another. My vision blurred, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not here. Not in front of him. "You're making a mistake," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. Richard just shrugged, already turning his attention back to the party. "Have a safe flight back home, Eleanor." I stood there in the gravel driveway for what felt like an eternity, watching the silhouettes of the happy couple through the window. Grayson was spinning the girl in the red dress. She threw her head back, laughing, and he leaned in to kiss her neck. My stomach violently churned. I spun on my heels and marched back to the rental car. The engine roared to life, sounding entirely too loud on the quiet, tree-lined Hampton Street. As I pulled away from the curb, I looked in the rearview mirror. Richard was still there, his glass raised in a mocking toast. I drove for miles, aimlessly, the GPS leading me nowhere. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the steering wheel straight. I finally pulled over at a rest stop on the Long Island Expressway, the humid night air doing nothing to clear the lump in my throat. I unlocked my phone. I finally had a signal. Dozens of notifications flooded in. One was a text from Grayson, sent 2 hours ago. "Hey, just landed. Running late. Don't wait up." Another was an Instagram notification. Martha had posted a story. It was a boomerang of Grayson, smiling like an idiot, holding a flute of champagne. The caption read, "Best brother ever. Thanks for saving the day, Gray." And there, in the corner of the screen, was the girl in the red dress. Her bracelet sparkled under the camera flash. I stared at the screen until the image burned into my retinas. Then I took a deep, shaky breath and typed a reply to Grayson's text. "We need to talk. Now." I hit send. The message failed. Not because of bad reception, but because he had blocked me. A harsh, dry sound escaped my throat. A laugh, a sob, I wasn't sure. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. 8 p.m. The wedding reception was in full swing. I picked up the phone again, not to call Grayson, but to open my banking app. I stared at the numbers. The offshore account. The one Grayson didn't know about. The one I had built up over the years from the freelance legal consulting gigs I took on the side. The ones I told him were just for fun. It was a lot of money. More than enough. My finger hovered over the transfer button. No, not yet. First, I needed to get to a hotel. I needed to sleep. I needed to think. But as I merged back onto the highway, joining the flow of traffic heading toward Manhattan, a different kind of feeling began to replace the heartbreak. It started as a tiny spark deep in my stomach, cold, hard, focused. By the time I checked into a midtown Manhattan hotel, the spark had become a flame. I dropped my bags in the sterile, impersonal suite and stood in the middle of the room, staring at my reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back wasn't the exhausted, betrayed wife from East Hampton, She was a litigator, and she was ready for court. My phone vibrated, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but instinct made me answer. Hello? Silence. Then a familiar voice, slurred with alcohol and arrogance. Eleanor, it's Grayson. My blood ran cold. How did you get this number? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Doesn't matter, he snapped, his tone shifting from surprise to irritated in an instant. What the hell are you doing in New York? And why did you try to ruin Martha's wedding? Do you have any idea how much you embarrassed me? I closed my eyes, picturing him, probably still in his tuxedo, reeking of booze and entitlement. I embarrassed you? I repeated. I flew 10 hours to be with my husband. Your father humiliated me in front of 100 people. Oh, come on, Elle, he scoffed. Dad was just messing around. You always take things so personally. Look, sorry for the mix-up, but you shouldn't have just shown up like that. That's not how we do things in this family. Family. I echoed the word in my mind. He practically dripped with condescension. Anyway, listen, I don't have time for this. The reason I'm calling is that the wedding bill came due. It's a disaster. 50 grand over budget. I blinked. Excuse me? 50,000? Eleanor, the catering, the flowers, the band, they're all demanding payment. And since you're the one who technically signed the initial venue contract, I signed it as a favor to your mother. I interrupted, my mind racing. I didn't authorize a spending overrun. Well, you signed it, Grayson said, his voice hardening. Which means we are both legally liable. So, I need to know how you want to handle this, because I am not paying for Martha's extravagance. This is on you. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sinking under my weight. $50,000. The number echoed in my head. He wasn't asking, he was telling me. Telling me that the price tag for his sister's wedding, a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend, was now my problem. I could hear music and laughter in the background. I could hear the girl in the red dress giggling. Something inside me snapped. The last frayed thread of the woman who loved Grayson Sullivan dissolved into nothing. In its place rose something new. Something razor sharp. How do I want to handle it? I repeated, the ghost of a smile touching my lips. Yeah, he said impatiently. Cash, check, wire transfer, whatever. Just handle it. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The flame in my stomach had become a roaring fire. Don't worry, Grayson, I said, my voice smooth as silk. I'll handle it. He paused, clearly surprised by my calm acceptance. You will? Yeah, just text me the vendor info. I'll get it sorted by Friday. The call disconnected. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the black screen. Then, slowly and deliberately, I opened my banking app again. I looked at the balance in my secret account. It was more than enough to cover $50,000 without a sweat. But I wasn't going to pay a single cent. Instead, I opened a new email. The address was a burner I had set up years ago, back when I still made enemies in the corporate world. The subject line was simple. Wedding bill. I typed 2 words. Game on. Then I saved it to drafts. I wouldn't send it yet. First, I needed to gather my ammunition. First, I needed to figure out exactly what kind of game we were playing. I stood up, walked to the minibar, and poured myself a glass of cheap bourbon. It burned on the way down, a harsh contrast to the smooth, aged Macallan Richard had been drinking. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window. To family, I muttered, draining the glass in one gulp. He made the first move. I would make the last. And when the dust settled, Grayson Sullivan and his precious family would wish they had never heard the name Eleanor Blake. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years. It rang twice before a raspy, familiar voice answered. Sterling and Pierce. Ray Sterling speaking. Ray, I said, my voice steady and clear. It's Eleanor. I need a favor. The silence in my hotel suite was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the cheap alarm clock on the nightstand. It was 2:17 a.m. I hadn't slept. Instead, I had spent the last 5 hours doing what I do best. Research. My laptop screen was a grid of open tabs. Bank records, property deeds, corporate filings for Sullivan Holdings LLC, and a particularly interesting dossier on a certain event planner named Bridget Sampson. Ray Sterling's voice still echoed in my head. Eleanor, you dropped off the map once. I didn't think you'd do it again. He hadn't sounded angry, just curious. Concerned, like a professor whose star pupil suddenly drops out to become a yoga instructor. When I told him I needed access to public records, specifically anything related to the Sullivan family and their recent financial transactions, he didn't ask questions. He just gave me a secure link and a password. Be careful what you dig up, he had warned. Some people don't like their skeletons dragged into the light. I fully intended to drag them all out. My phone vibrated on the desk, rattling against my empty water glass. It was a text from an unknown number. I knew who it was before I even looked. We need to talk about the money. Call me. No hello, no how are you. Just a demand. Classic Grayson. I left the message on read for a good 10 minutes. Then I dialed his number. He picked up on the first ring, sounding breathless, like he was pacing. Finally, he snapped. Do you have any idea what time it is here? It's just past 2:30, I said, my voice cold and professional. I was sitting at a desk, not lounging in bed, and I made sure my posture reflected it. In London, where I just flew in from. It's midday. I haven't slept, Grayson. Unlike you, who was probably passed out drunk at your sister's wedding after making me feel like a criminal for showing up. A pause. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head, trying to recalibrate. He shifted tactics. Okay, look, I'm sorry about my dad. He can be difficult, but that's beside the point. The point is, we have a massive problem. Martha's wedding cost a fortune. The final bill is 50 grand over what we projected. I see, I said, pulling up the spreadsheet I had been compiling. And how exactly did it go 50,000 over? It doesn't matter how, he yelled, and I heard a muffled thud, like he had slammed his hand on a table. The caterer, the florist, the band, they're all demanding payment. And since you technically signed the contract, I didn't authorize a spending overrun, I interrupted, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Nor did I agree to be the primary guarantor for Martha's impulsive decisions. You are legally on the hook, he said, his voice dropping to a low, threatening growl. We both are, which means if we don't pay, they'll sue us. And a lawsuit like that will drag my name through the mud. Think of the optics, Eleanor. I'm about to close a major funding round for my new venture. I can't have this kind of mess. There it was, the real reason. It wasn't about the money. It was about his precious reputation. So you want me to pay? I stated. I didn't ask. I want us to handle it. He corrected, but the implication was clear. Look, I'm illiquid right now. The prenup is bulletproof. You know that. I can't just pull 25 grand out of thin air. All my liquidity is tied up in the new fund. He was lying. I had seen the wire transfer receipts from the sale of his last startup. The money was there. He just didn't want to spend his own. What about your father? I asked, leaning back in the chair. He threw the party. He practically forced Martha to have it at his country club. Why isn't he footing the bill? Grayson laughed, a short, bitter sound. Are you kidding? Dad advanced the money for the rest. He expects us, you and me, to cover the overage. It's called family responsibility, Elle. Something you never really seem to grasp. Family responsibility. The phrase made my skin crawl. It was the same guilt trip Richard used to force me into organizing his annual Christmas galas, donating to his favorite charities, and staying silent while he made disparaging remarks about my upbringing. Fine, I said, letting the word hang in the air between us. I'll handle it. He exhaled audibly. I could hear the smirk returning to his voice. Good. I knew you'd be reasonable. I'm going to forward you the vendor info. There's a wire transfer form attached. Just get it done by Friday. And Eleanor, try not to make a mess of this. Just pay the damn bill so we can put this messy weekend behind us. The call disconnected. I stared at my phone for a long moment, then slowly lowered it to the desk. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was a hot, messy emotion. What I felt was cold, sharp, and precise. It was the feeling I used to get right before delivering a closing argument. I opened the message he had forwarded. Attached was a PDF from a company called Hampton's Luxury Events, owned by one Bridget Sampson. The invoice was itemized, but only vaguely. It listed premium buffet service at $350 per head for 120 guests. That was over $40,000 right there. Then there was floral design and installation for $15,000, the East End musicians for $12,000, and at the bottom, a line item that made my blood run cold. Miscellaneous event. Enhancements. $10,000. Enhancements? What kind of enhancements cost 10 grand? I clicked the secure link Ray had sent me, logging into the New York State Business Registry database. I typed in Bridget Sampson. A few clicks later, I had her business license, her registered agents, and a curious little lien filed against her by a former employee for unpaid wages. Interesting. Then I cross-referenced the vendor names against public records. The catering company, Gourmet Banquets Inc., was owned by a man named Anthony Faria. A quick search revealed Anthony Faria was also the treasurer of the exact same country club where Richard Sullivan served on the board of directors. Coincidence? Hardly. I spent the next hour building a case. Screenshots, links, notes. By the time the sun began to rise over Manhattan, painting the skyscrapers in shades of pink and gold, I had a clear picture. This wasn't a simple wedding that went over budget. This was a conspiracy of convenience. Richard used his connections to hire his friends' companies. They inflated the bills. Grayson, the golden boy, was just supposed to pay up and look the other way. And I, the outsider, was meant to be the ultimate deep pocket. They had underestimated me. They had treated me like a commodity, a source of funds to be tapped when needed. They forgot that I was a corporate litigator. I didn't just read contracts, I eviscerated them. I ordered room service, a pot of black coffee and dry toast, and stared out the window at the waking city. People were rushing to work, hailing cabs, living their lives. None of them knew a hurricane was brewing in a midtown hotel room. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Grayson. The subject line was, repayment. Attached was a screenshot of a filled-out wire transfer form with my name and account number. The amount was $25,000. The memo line read, Martha's wedding overage. Below it, his email was short and blunt. L, stop dragging your feet. The vendors are getting impatient. Just pay the bill so we can move on. I stared at the email. Then I did something I had been planning since the moment Richard blocked my path at the gate. I forwarded the email, along with the entire invoice and my preliminary findings, to 3 people. The first was Bridget Sampson, the wedding planner. Subject line, inquiry regarding invoice, Hashite 47wo. The second was Richard Sullivan. Subject line, transparency and family finances. The third was Martha Sullivan. Subject line, your wedding bill. The body of the email to all 3 was identical. To whom it may concern, I am writing to request a detailed, itemized breakdown of the charges listed on the attached invoice for the recent Sullivan wedding. Specifically, I am interested in clarifying the $10,000 charge for miscellaneous event enhancements and the $6,000 charge for the surprise fireworks display, which, according to multiple witness accounts, including my own from the road, did not occur. As a co-signer on the initial venue contract, I have a legal right to a full accounting of these funds. Please provide this documentation by end of day Friday, or I will be forced to escalate this matter to the Better Business Bureau, the State Attorney General, and appropriate regulatory bodies. Sincerely, Eleanor Blake Sullivan. I hit send to all 3. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the one number I knew would get a reaction. It rang 4 times before a sleepy, irritated voice answered. Who is this? Grumbled Richard Sullivan. Richard, I said, my voice bright and cheerful. It's Eleanor. I hope I didn't wake you. I just sent you an email. I'm sure you'll find it enlightening. There was a moment of silence. Then I heard the rustling of sheets, followed by the sound of a laptop opening. A few seconds later, his voice changed. The sleepiness vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. What the hell is this? He roared. What kind of game are you playing, you ungrateful little? I'm not playing a game, Richard, I interrupted, cutting him off mid-insult. I am simply asking for transparency. You taught me that, remember? Always know where your money goes. Well, I intend to know. And if I don't get answers, I will be contacting the Attorney General, the IRS, and my own legal counsel, all before lunch. You wouldn't dare, he whispered. Wouldn't I? I said, hearing the challenge in his voice. Try me, Richard. If you or anyone else contacts me again about this bill, you'll be hearing directly from my lawyer. Have a lovely morning. I hung up before he could respond. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. Adrenaline. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Grayson. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. I switched the phone to Do Not Disturb and placed it face down on the desk. The next call was from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but instinct kicked in again. Hello? Mrs. Sullivan? A hesitant female voice. This is Bridget Sampson. I just received your email. I smiled. Here we go. Miss Sampson, I said smoothly. Thank you for getting back to me so promptly. I assume you received the invoice and my request for clarification. Yes, I did, she stammered. And I just want to say, I am so sorry for the confusion. That $10,000 charge? It was a mistake, a clerical error. It was actually for the extra security detail your father-in-law requested at the last minute. And the fireworks! Yes, the weather was too windy, so we canceled. I must have forgotten to adjust the final bill. Security detail. What security detail? There were no paparazzi at this wedding. Unless, I see, I thought, tucking that little nugget of information away for later. And the $6,000 for the canceled fireworks? Oh, that was absorbed into the floral budget, she said quickly. Please, Mrs. Sullivan, I can issue you a revised invoice today. Just, please, don't report me to the Attorney General. My business couldn't survive a hit like that. I'm glad we could clear this up, Miss Sampson, I said. Send me the corrected invoice, and if I see any more clerical errors, I won't be so understanding. I hung up, a slow burn of satisfaction spreading through my chest. 1 down. 2 to go. My phone vibrated again. A text from Martha. Oh my God, Eleanor, what is going on? Dad is freaking out. He says you're going to sue him? Please call me. This isn't fair. I worked so hard on my wedding. I didn't reply. Let her sweat. Let them all sweat. I stood up and stretched, the stiffness of sitting for so long finally catching up with me. I walked over to the minibar and grabbed another tiny bottle of bourbon. I didn't even bother with a glass. I just unscrewed the cap and took a swig. The taste was harsh, but it went down brilliantly. I looked at the clock. 7:45 a.m. I had maybe an hour before the real counterattack began, before Grayson and Richard regrouped and came after me with everything they had, but I wasn't worried. I walked over to my laptop and opened a new document. The title was simple. Case Notes. Sullivan v. Sullivan. Preliminary Findings. Below it, I typed a single sentence. Plaintiff alleges a pattern of financial mismanagement, fraudulent misrepresentation, and emotional coercion, with defendant's own actions serving as primary evidence. I saved the file. The game had just begun, and for the first time in 12 years, I was playing to win. The first shot predictably came from Grayson. Not a call this time. He knew better. It was an email sent to my private account, CCing his lawyer. The subject line was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Your unfortunate misunderstanding regarding family finances. I almost laughed. Misunderstanding. That was rich. I opened the attachment. It was a cease and desist letter, drafted by some ambulance-chasing attorney he probably found online. It accused me of making baseless, defamatory accusations against upstanding members of the community, and demanded I retract my emails and cease all further communication. It was laughable. A boilerplate template. The only name on it was some junior associates. The senior partner's signature was glaringly absent. They were testing the waters. I forwarded it to Ray Sterling with a single note. Thoughts? His reply came 10 minutes later. Amateur hour. Ignore. They're scared. Scared. Yes, that was the scent in the air. Fear. The Sullivans operated on the assumption that their wealth and social standing made them untouchable. They were about to learn that paper tigers burn easily. At 9:15 a.m., my phone rang. Private number. Pick up, Eleanor. Richard Sullivan's voice was different this time. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a tight, pleading tone. We need to talk calmly, like adults. I'm listening, I said, swiveling my chair to face the window. The city was fully awake now, a hive of activity. I felt a strange sense of peace watching it. The email, he started, his voice strained, was poorly handled. Bridget is a fool. She should have itemized everything from the start. But this threat to go to the authorities? That's a step too far, Eleanor. It reflects poorly on all of us. All of you? I echoed. Or just you, Richard? He sighed, a long, theatrical sound. Look, I admit there might have been some creative accounting to maximize the tax benefits for the family trust. But you have to understand, that's how business is done. It's fraud, I corrected. And you dragged me into it by putting my name on that contract. You signed it of your own free will, he shot back, his temper flaring. As a favor to your mother-in-law, a favor you're now trying to weaponize against me. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Here is what's going to happen, Richard. You're going to call off your dogs, the wedding planner, the caterer, all of them. You're going to tell them I am not liable for a single dime of that overage. Then you're going to call your son and tell him to stop harassing me. And if I don't? He asked, the threat hanging heavy in the air. If you don't, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, I will walk into the IRS field office in Lower Manhattan on Monday morning with a binder full of invoices, bank statements, and a sworn affidavit explaining exactly how Richard Sullivan used his daughter's wedding as a personal tax deduction. The call disconnected. He had hung up on me. But I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew I had the receipts. 5 minutes later, my phone pinged. A text from Grayson. What the hell did you say to my dad? He just called me screaming. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. Just pay the damn bill, Eleanor. It's not worth destroying the family over. I stared at the text. Destroying the family. He was the one who banned me from the wedding. He was the one sleeping with another woman. He was the one trying to stick me with a fraudulent bill. I didn't reply. I had bigger fish to fry. I opened my laptop and navigated to the corporate registry for Sullivan Holdings, LLC. I had been there before, but this time I was looking for something specific. Board members, directors, financial disclosures. It was a private company, so information was limited, but not non-existent. I found what I was looking for buried in an annual report from 3 years ago. A list of properties held by the LLC. One of them was a beachfront estate in East Hampton, the exact same one where the wedding was held. The property was valued at $10 million, but the mortgage listed in the county records was only $2 million. That meant Richard had $8 million in equity. Equity he could easily tap into to pay for his daughter's wedding. He didn't need my money. He just wanted to control me. I spent the next hour drafting a formal response to the cease and desist letter from Grayson's lawyer. It was a work of art, if I do say so myself. I cited case law, pointed out the glaring flaws in their argument, and concluded with a paragraph that was equal parts warning and promise. Furthermore, my client reserves the right to pursue civil action against Mr. Sullivan and his associates for tortious interference, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Any further attempts at intimidation will be viewed as evidence of a pattern of harassment and will be presented to the court as such. Please advise your client to cease and desist from contacting my client directly or indirectly. All future communication must go through my office. I signed it Eleanor Blake and attached it to an email to Ray Sterling. Can you slap your letterhead on this and send it over? Make it official. His reply was instantaneous. On it. And Eleanor, brace yourself. This is going to get ugly. Ugly. I could handle ugly. I had grown up in ugly. This wasn't ugly. This was just business. The rest of the day passed in a blur of legal documents, online research, and carefully crafted emails. I ate the rest of my cold toast and drank 3 more cups of terrible hotel coffee. By 5 p.m., I had a complete timeline of events. I knew who ordered what, who paid whom, and exactly where the paper trail went cold. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was a forest fire of circumstantial evidence. That evening, I decided to treat myself. I left the hotel and walked 15 blocks to a small, unassuming Italian restaurant that reminded me of my law school days in Chicago. The food was incredible, the wine was cheap, and the atmosphere was blissfully normal. I ate a plate of linguine with clams and watched the couples around me, holding hands, laughing, sharing their lives. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was distant, like remembering a dream. When I returned to my hotel room, there was a message waiting on the hotel's voicemail system. It was Martha. She sounded like she had been crying. Eleanor, please. I don't know what's going on. Dad is screaming at everyone. Grayson is freaking out. My honeymoon is booked and I think they're going to cancel it because of this stupid bill. Just tell me what you want. If you want money, fine. Name a price. I just don't want my wedding ruined by all this drama. Call me back. I deleted the message. I didn't want her money. I didn't want her pity. I wanted her to understand that the world didn't revolve around her and Daddy's bank account. I turned on the TV. I watched it with a glass of wine, analyzing the prosecution's case, finding the holes in their logic. It was a comforting ritual. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed. A news alert. I almost ignored it, but the headline caught my eye. Local real estate mogul faces IRS scrutiny amidst ongoing family feud. My blood ran cold. I clicked the link. The article was short, buried in the local section of the New York Post. It stated that sources close to the Sullivan family confirmed the IRS had initiated a routine audit of Sullivan Holdings LLC, following anonymous tips regarding potential tax discrepancies tied to personal expenses. Anonymous tips. I smiled. I hadn't submitted any tips. Not yet. But someone had. Someone who wanted to stir the pot. Was it Bridget trying to save her own skin? Or someone else entirely? Either way, the message was clear. The noose was tightening. I picked up my phone and dialed the one number I knew would give me the truth. Ray, I said when he answered, his voice groggy. It's Eleanor. Did you see the news? I did, he said, sounding remarkably awake for someone who had just been roused from sleep. Timing is interesting. Too interesting, I agreed. Someone's trying to spook them. Or someone's trying to help you? Ray countered. Either way, it accelerates the timeline. They're going to come at you with everything they have now. Grayson will be desperate. I know, I said, a shiver of anticipation running down my spine. And I'm ready. I ended the call and stood in the middle of the room, the glow of the television washing over me. I thought of Grayson, of Richard, of the looks on their faces when they realized they could no longer bully me. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my old briefcase, the one I used to take to court. Inside, nestled next to my law degree, was a small silver letter opener. I ran my thumb along the sharp edge. Tomorrow, the gloves were coming off. Tomorrow, Eleanor Blake would stop sending emails and start filing motions. I placed the letter opener on the desk next to my laptop. It gleamed in the lamplight. A silent promise. The $50,000 bill was just the opening salvo. The war was just beginning, and I fully intended to collect every single cent they owed me, plus interest. The morning sun did nothing to warm the steel trap my life had become. I woke up at 6 a.m. sharp, not because of an alarm, but out of a deeply ingrained habit formed during my years at Sterling and Pierce. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when the opposition was already circling. I brewed a cup of the hotel's complimentary coffee, which tasted like burnt rubber, and sat down at the desk. My inbox was a war zone. Overnight, I had received 17 emails, 3 from Grayson, ranging in tone from pleading to threatening, 5 from Richard, all filtered through his personal assistant, demanding a family summit, and 9 from various vendors associated with the wedding, each more panicked than the last, begging for payment or clarification. I deleted Grayson's emails without reading them. I forwarded Richard's to Ray with a note, "Summit over my dead body." And I drafted a single, unified response to the vendors. To whom it may concern, please direct all inquiries regarding payment for the Sullivan wedding to the offices of Richard Sullivan, care of Sullivan Holdings LLC. My client, Eleanor Blake Sullivan, is not responsible for any unauthorized expenses. Be advised that any further attempts to contact my client regarding this matter will be considered harassment and reported to the appropriate authorities. Sincerely, Ray Sterling, Esk Sterling, and Pierce, LLP. I attached the letter Ray had sent the night before and hit send. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the one person who could give me the lay of the land. Good morning, sunshine, Ray's voice boomed over the receiver. He sounded like he had been awake for hours, probably already at his desk in the financial district. I assume you've seen the circus, I said, sipping my terrible coffee. Any idea who leaked the financial story to the Post? Off the record, Ray said, his voice dropping. Probably Bridget Sampson. She's desperate. She knows if this blows up, her license is toast. She's trying to throw the Sullivans under the bus to save herself. Smart woman, I murmured. Desperate, but smart. Speaking of desperate, Ray continued, Grayson just retained Teresa Gates. My hand froze in midair, the coffee cup hovering inches from my lips. Teresa Gates. The name was a punch to the gut. She was the most feared divorce attorney in Manhattan, notorious for her scorched earth tactics and her ability to financially bury her opponents before a case even reached a courtroom. She was also legendary for never losing. Retaining her wasn't a legal maneuver, it was a declaration of war. "He isn't wasting any time," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Neither are you," Ray replied. "Teresa is good. Arrogant, but good. She's going to try to bury you in paperwork and motions to dismiss. We need to be proactive. We need to strike first." "Agreed," I said, setting the cup down. The caffeine had suddenly lost its appeal. "What are my options?" "We have grounds for a tortious interference claim against Grayson for dragging you into that contract. We also have a strong case for fraudulent misrepresentation against Richard and the wedding planner. But the main event, the thing that's really going to get their attention, is the prenup." I leaned back in my chair, the leather squeaking. "The prenup is bulletproof." "You said so yourself." "It is," Ray confirmed. "If we play by the rules, but every contract has a poison pill, a clause that can void it. In your case, it's Section 7B, subsection 4. I pulled up a scanned copy of the prenup on my screen. I hadn't read it in years. My eyes skimmed the dense legalese until I found it. In the event of documented proof of infidelity by either party, coupled with financial mismanagement or deceit intended to deprive the other party of marital assets, the terms of this agreement shall be rendered null and void. Infidelity, financial mismanagement. I had both. The bracelet, the hidden accounts, the fake wedding invoice. It's a high bar," I said, thinking out loud. "We'd need irrefutable proof." "We have the proof," Ray said. "The question is, are you ready to use it? Because once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. You're divorcing him, Eleanor. For real." I stared at the words on the screen. Null and void. The prenup was my prison. And now I had the key. "I've been divorced from him since the moment he let his father block my path at that gate," I said, my voice icy and unwavering. "File the papers, Ray. Today." The line went silent for a moment. Then I heard the sound of a pen clicking. "Consider it done. I'll have the initial petition ready by noon. But Eleanor? Get a good security system. Maybe a bodyguard. Teresa Gates plays dirty. And Grayson Sullivan. He's about to lose everything. Desperate men do stupid things." I hung up the phone, a strange sense of calm washing over me. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a steely determination. I was no longer fighting for a marriage. I was fighting for my future. I spent the next 2 hours preparing. I gathered all the evidence I had. The photos of the girl in the red dress, the bank statements showing Grayson's hidden funds, the emails regarding the wedding bill, the audio recording of Richard admitting to creative accounting. I organized it all into a digital dossier, labeled and time-stamped. At 11:30 a.m., my phone rang. It was the front desk. "Miss Blake, there is a courier here with a delivery for you." "A delivery?" I frowned. I wasn't expecting anything. "All right, send him up." Minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I peeked through the peephole. A young man in a courier uniform stood there, holding a thick envelope. I opened the door. "Eleanor Blake?" he asked. "That's me." He handed me the envelope and a clipboard. "Sign here, please." I scribbled my name and took the package. It was heavier than I expected. I closed the door and walked back to the desk. I ripped open the seal. Inside was a single document, printed on expensive, heavy stock paper, bearing the logo of Gates & Associates. It was a summons. Grayson was suing me for divorce. The petition was brutal in its efficiency. It cited irreconcilable differences and emotional cruelty, a laughable accusation given the circumstances. It demanded I pay his legal fees. It demanded I vacate our marital home in Chicago, the one I had decorated, maintained, and paid the mortgage on for years while he played startup founder. And at the bottom, there was a demand for sole ownership of the East Hampton estate, claiming it was a premarital asset despite the fact that I had contributed significantly to its upkeep and renovation. Teresa Gates had made her opening move. I read through it, my lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't just trying to divorce me, he was trying to erase me. To pretend our 12 years of marriage had never happened, I picked up my phone and dialed Ray's number. "He filed," I said, stating the obvious. "I know," Ray replied, the clatter of his keyboard audible in the background. "I just got the electronic notification." "It's ambitious. It's a joke," I said, tossing the summons onto the desk. "He thinks he can bully me into folding." "Gates is playing her usual game," Ray said. She wants to intimidate you, make you settle early for pennies. Don't fall for it. I won't, I promised. Did you get my email with the evidence? Just reviewed it, he said. It's solid. The photo of the bracelet is particularly damning. And the audio recording of Richard? A showstopper. Can we use that? Good, I said, standing up and walking to the window. The city was a concrete jungle, and I was about to become its apex predator. Then let's give them something to really chew on. File our counterclaim today. Include everything. The infidelity, the financial fraud, the breach of the prenup. And Ray? Make sure Teresa Gates gets a copy before the end of the day. I ended the call and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back was not the same one who had arrived in New York 2 days ago. She was sharper, harder, ready. My phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a photo, a close-up of Grayson's hand holding the hand of a woman in a red dress. The caption read, "He's much happier now. You should just go back to Chicago." I stared at the photo, then zoomed in. There, on the woman's wrist, was the diamond tennis bracelet, and on Grayson's finger, a glimpse of a new tattoo. A small, intricate design I didn't recognize. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a fling. This was serious. This was Iris, and she was sending this to me from his phone. I saved the image, added it to the digital dossier, then blocked the number. Let them think they were winning. Let them think they could bully me with cheap photos and nasty texts. Because when my counterclaim hit Teresa Gates's desk, the look on Grayson's face was going to be priceless. I picked up the letter opener from my desk and ran my thumb along its edge one last time. Then I slipped it carefully into my bag. It was time to go to war. The rest of the day was a blur of legal formalities and strategic posturing. Ray's team at Sterling and Pierce worked with the terrifying silent efficiency of a surgical strike team. At 3 p.m., I received a secure link to the draft of our counterclaim. I read it, my eyes widening at its sheer scale. Ray hadn't just counterattacked, he had aimed straight for the solar plexus. The document was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It systematically dismantled Grayson's claims of emotional cruelty, presenting a mountain of evidence that painted him as the architect of his own misery. It quoted the prenup's poison pill verbatim, attaching the photo of Iris's bracelet and the audio recording of Richard discussing tax fraud. But the true coup de grace was buried on page 27. Ray had uncovered a series of wire transfers, small amounts initially, 5,000 here, 10,000 there, moving from Grayson's corporate account to an offshore entity based in Delaware, routed through the Caymans. The entity was named Redwood Ventures, LLC. It had no listed employees, no physical address, and no discernible business purpose, except, of course, to hide money. And the most recent transfer was for $500,000, dated 3 days after the wedding. A clear attempt to move assets out of the marital estate before divorce proceedings could freeze them. It was a classic move, and it was going to cost him dearly. I called Ray immediately. "Redwood Ventures," I said, my voice tight with a mix of fury and dark satisfaction. "Are you sure it's his?" "Absolutely sure," Ray said, the sound of papers shuffling in the background. "We got lucky. He used his personal Gmail account to set up the initial wire instructions, and it was tied to his old laptop, which we managed to subpoena records for. He thought he was being clever using a personal device for business. He was just being stupid. Stupid and greedy," I murmured. This was no longer just a divorce. These were grounds for criminal charges. Wire fraud, tax evasion, the list was growing. "We're going to freeze those assets," Ray assured me. "The judge will sign the order this afternoon, and once we present this to Gates, she'll have no choice but to advise her client to settle." I hoped he was right. But I also knew Teresa Gates. She didn't advise clients to settle. She fought to the bitter end, no matter how untenable the position. Sure enough, at 4:55 p.m., my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was before I picked up. "Eleanor Blake?" I said, my voice crisp and professional. "Miss Blake, this is Teresa Gates." Her voice was exactly as I had imagined, smooth, polished, and entirely devoid of warmth. It was the voice of a woman who charged $1,500 an hour and expected you to thank her for it. "Miss Gates, to what do I owe the pleasure? I just finished reviewing your... let's call it a creative counterclaim," she said, a hint of amusement in her tone. I must say, it's rare to see such a spectacular collection of half-truths and innuendos strung together so artfully. They aren't innuendos, miss. Gates? I replied, keeping my voice steady. They're evidence. Sworn affidavits, forensic accounting, and a clear pattern of financial misconduct. Your client is facing criminal charges, not just a divorce settlement. She laughed, a short, brittle sound. My client is a pillar of the community, Miss Blake. A successful entrepreneur. These are the desperate allegations of a woman who abandoned her career to play trophy wife. Do you really think a judge is going to believe a man like Grayson Sullivan needs to hide $500,000 from his spouse? $500,000! I echoed, letting the lie hang in the air. Is that all you think it is? Because our forensic accountant found closer to $2.5 million, Miss Gates, and the transfers span 4 years. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she recalculated her strategy. $2.5 million is a significant allegation, she finally said, her tone cooling slightly. If you have proof. I do, I interrupted. And it will be presented in discovery, along with the evidence of his affair, which I'm sure you'll agree voids the prenup. So let's stop the posturing, Miss Gates. You know as well as I do that your client is in a hole and he's still digging. She was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice low and dangerous. You are making a very big mistake, Eleanor. You think you can take on the Sullivan family? You think you can destroy Grayson and walk away with a fortune? You are going to find out exactly how powerful we are. I suggest you reconsider your position before you force my hand. I'm not forcing your hand, Miss Gates, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. Your client did that himself the moment he decided to betray his wife and steal from his family. Have a good evening. I hung up the phone, my heart pounding. That was it. The gauntlet had been thrown. Teresa Gates had just moved from legal maneuvering to outright threats, which meant I was winning. I spent the rest of the evening in my hotel room, a prisoner of my own making. I ordered room service, a rare steak and a baked potato, and ate it at my desk while I worked. I was building my case, organizing every piece of evidence, creating timelines, and drafting witness lists. I was preparing for a trial, not just a settlement conference, because I knew, deep in my soul, that this was going to court. Around 9 p.m., I decided to take a break. I needed to clear my head. I put on my workout gear and headed down to the hotel gym. It was a blissfully quiet sanctuary of squeaking machines and stale air. I got on the treadmill and set it to a punishing incline, pushing my body until my lungs burned and my legs screamed. It was the only way I knew how to silence the noise in my head. I was on mile 4 when the gym door opened. I looked in the mirror, and my stride faltered for a fraction of a second before I forced myself to keep going. It was Iris. She was dressed in impossibly tight leggings and a sports bra that probably cost more than my monthly rent in Chicago. She was holding a water bottle and staring at me with a mix of defiance and, was that pity? She walked over to the elliptical machine next to mine, the one that always squeaked. Hello, Eleanor, she said, her voice breathless and falsely friendly. What a coincidence running into you here. I didn't slow down. Iris, I didn't realize you were part of the starving artist demographic now. Or did Grayson buy you a day pass? Her smile tightened. I could say the same about you. I thought you were a top-tier lawyer. Shouldn't you be, I don't know, working instead of playing on a treadmill? I am working, I said, meeting her gaze in the mirror. I'm building a case against your boyfriend. It's time-consuming. She rolled her eyes, but I saw the flicker of uncertainty in her reflection. Are you really going to do this? Are you going to drag this out and make everyone miserable? Everyone, I echoed. Or just you and Grayson? She sighed, a dramatic put-upon sound. Look, I get it. You're hurt. But you need to accept that Grayson has moved on. He's with me now, and we're serious. Serious enough for a matching tattoo? I asked, my voice dripping with ice. The one on his ribs? The one that says I plus G? Her face went white. She hadn't known about that. Or maybe she thought it was just a coincidence. Either way, the lie was exposed. What do you want, Eleanor? She snapped, her friendly mask finally slipping. Money? Is that it? You want to bleed him dry and then crawl back to Chicago with your tail between your legs? I want justice, I said, slowing the treadmill to a walk and finally turning to face her. And I want what's mine. And for your information, Iris, Next time you decide to text your rival a photo of your boyfriend's hand, you might want to make sure your own wrist isn't in the shot. That bracelet is a little recognizable. I nodded toward the diamond tennis bracelet sparkling on her wrist, the exact same one I had found in Grayson's car. Her hand flew to her wrist, her eyes wide with horror. I grabbed my towel and water bottle. As I stepped off the treadmill, I leaned in close, just enough for her to hear me over the hum of the machines. "Have a good run," I murmured. "It might be your last one as a free woman." I walked out of the gym, leaving her standing there staring at her wrist in shock. Back in my room, I checked my phone. A single text from an unknown number. "You." I smiled. Let her stew. Let them all stew. I had a long night ahead of me. I made the first move, and I had just checkmated their queen. Now it was time to go after the king. The adrenaline from the confrontation in the gym with Iris had faded by midnight, leaving behind a familiar, corrosive emptiness. Sleep was impossible. My mind was a live electrical wire, sparking with connections, implications, and the ghost of her face when I mentioned the bracelet. So, I did what any sane person would do at 1 a.m. in a strange hotel room. I went to work. I reopened my laptop, the screen's glare cutting through the darkness. The file on Grayson was growing, but it was still missing a crucial piece. The family. Richard Sullivan wasn't just a pompous father-in-law. He was the head of a real estate empire built on a foundation that was starting to look less like solid bedrock and more like quicksand. I needed to know the depth of the rot. I navigated to the online database of the Suffolk County Clerk's Office, a public repository of property deeds, liens, and corporate filings. It was a treasure trove for anyone willing to dig, and I was more than willing. I started with Sullivan Holdings LLC, running a comprehensive search on all properties associated with the company. Most of it was legitimate: beachfront mansions, commercial storefronts, a portfolio of rental properties. But 3 listings caught my eye. They were industrial lots located in less desirable parts of Long Island, far from the manicured lawns of the wealthy enclaves. According to the records, they were owned by Sullivan Holdings, but they were valued significantly lower than comparable properties in the area, and each one had a massive recent mortgage attached to it. I cross-referenced the mortgage lenders. They weren't traditional banks. They were small storefront lending companies with names like Coastal Capital Solutions and East End Equity Group. A quick search revealed these companies specialized in high-risk, high-interest loans that were often predatory. And the borrower on all 3 loans wasn't Sullivan Holdings LLC. It was Richard Sullivan, personally. He had mortgaged his personal assets to prop up failing commercial ventures. That explained the desperation for the wedding money. He wasn't just being cheap, he was in trouble. I dug deeper. I found financing records showing Richard had used his personal stock portfolio as collateral for these loans. And if the stock market dipped, or if one of his properties went underwater, he would be forced to sell. Everything he had was leveraged to the hilt. The Sullivan family fortune wasn't a fortress. It was a house of cards, and the wind was picking up. I compiled the evidence into a new folder, labeling it Financial Exposure of Richard Sullivan. Then I turned my attention back to the man who had started this whole mess, my soon-to-be ex-husband. I needed to know more about Redwood Ventures LLC. Delaware was notoriously secretive, but I wasn't without resources. I had a friend from law school, a brilliant forensic accountant named Kenji Tanaka, who now ran his own firm specializing in international asset recovery. I sent him a secure message with the details of the wire transfers and the shell company's name. Within an hour, he replied, Redwood Ventures is a classic shell game. The registered agent is a law firm in Wilmington, no beneficial owners listed. But I ran the transaction patterns through our AI model. The IP addresses used to initiate the transfers don't originate in Delaware. They bounce through servers in Toronto and London before hitting a residential address right here in Manhattan. Want to guess whose residential address? My blood ran cold. I already knew. I replied, bingo. Specifically, his Soho penthouse, the one he told me he sold 2 years ago. Looks like he just transferred the title to an LLC he controls and kept living there. The plot thickens. Kenji sent me a screenshot of the data. It was irrefutable. Grayson hadn't just hidden money. He had hidden property, a multi-million-dollar asset. And if he lied about that, what else was he hiding? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The web was tightening. Every move they made, every lie they told, only served to entangle them further. They were amateur criminals, sloppy and arrogant, believing their own hype. It was almost too easy. Almost. At 4 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a video call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. The screen went black for a moment. Then an image appeared. It was shaky, poorly lit. It was Grayson's apartment in Soho. I recognized the view from the window, the layout of the kitchen. And there, sitting on the counter, was a bottle of that 40-year-old Macallan, Richard's favorite. Then the camera panned, and I saw them. Grayson and Iris. They were having a screaming match. "You said she was bluffing!" Iris hissed, her face contorted with rage. "You said she wouldn't fight! Now look at this mess! My dad is calling me, asking if it's true. I'm handling it!" Grayson yelled, slamming his hand on the counter. The bottle of scotch wobbled precariously. "Teresa is the best. She'll bury her." Bury her? She just served us with a counterclaim that includes a motion to freeze your assets. Do you even realize what that means? It means you can't pay your own lawyers. You can't pay your rent. "Are you broke, Grayson?" "I'm not broke," he roared, grabbing the bottle and taking a swig straight from it. "I have money. I have investments." "Liar!" Iris screamed. "Your father is broke. He mortgaged everything up to his eyeballs. He's the one who needed the wedding money. And now you've dragged me into this. I'm going to be deposed. My name is going to be in the papers." Grayson's face twisted in rage. He lunged at her, grabbing her by the arm. "Shut up! Just shut up! You're nothing but a gold digger anyway. You're lucky I even look at you," Iris shrieked, trying to pull away. The camera spun wildly, then clattered to the floor. The video ended in a shower of static. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding. I rewound the video, watching it over and over. I saved it to my encrypted drive. That wasn't just proof, that was a confession. A domestic dispute captured on video, complete with admissions of financial distress, emotional abuse, and a clear motive for Iris to turn on him. I forwarded the video to Ray with a single note, Attachment A. Then I did something I had been planning since the moment Richard blocked my path at the gate. I drafted an email to an address I found on the IRS whistleblower portal. I attached the property records for the 3 industrial lots, the details of the predatory loans, and a summary of Richard's financial exposure. I didn't include Grayson's name or the divorce proceedings. This was purely about Richard and his potential tax fraud. It was clean, it was legal, and it was devastating. I hit send. An hour later, as the first gray light of dawn began to creep over Manhattan, my phone rang. It was Ray. "Have you slept?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. "Define sleep," I said, rubbing my eyes. "I just got off the phone with Teresa Gates," he said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "She's rattled. She received our motion to freeze assets along with Kenji's forensic report. And apparently her client had a heated argument with his girlfriend last night that was accidentally recorded." "Accidentally," I murmured. "Let's just say it's compelling evidence," Ray said. "Gates is advising her client to settle. She says the case is unwinnable." My heart leaped. "So we've got them." "Not exactly," Ray cautioned. "Grayson refuses to settle. He insists on taking the case to trial, convinced he can still bully you. He's being difficult." Of course he was. He was cornered, and cornered animals were the most dangerous. "Keep pushing for a settlement," I said, my voice hardening. "But prepare for trial, because if he wants a fight, I'm going to give him one he'll never forget." I ended the call and stood up, stretching the ache in my back. I walked to the window, staring down at the waking city. Somewhere out there, Grayson was probably nursing a hangover and a bruised ego. Richard was probably staring at his mounting debts. And Iris. Iris was probably looking for an exit strategy. Let them squirm. Let them conspire and lie to each other. Because I had the one thing they couldn't buy or bully, the truth. And in a few hours, the entire Sullivan family was going to learn a very painful lesson about what happens when you underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. I picked up my phone and dialed the one person who could deliver the final blow. "Kenji," I said when he answered. "I need you to do one more thing for me. I need you to find every piece of real estate Richard Sullivan owns, every loan he's taken out, and every tax loophole he's ever exploited. And I need it yesterday." "Consider it done," Kenji said, his voice grim. "This is going to ruin him." "I know," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "That's the point. I hung up the phone and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had arrived in New York 2 days ago. She was a weapon, a scalpel, and the Sullivan family was about to go under the knife. I made the first move. They would make the last, and it would be checkmate. At 9 a.m., the city was a symphony of chaos. Car horns, sirens, the distant wail of a fire truck. I had showered, dressed in a sleek charcoal gray pantsuit I had rush delivered from Saks Fifth Avenue, and was sitting at my makeshift command center waiting for the fallout. The suit was a statement. It said, litigator, not idle wife. It said, power. My phone buzzed. A text from Ray. Gates just called. Wants to meet today, 2 p.m. Her office. I stared at the text. This was it. The first real negotiation. I typed back a single word. Accepted. Then I called Kenji. He picked up on the first ring, sounding like he had pulled an all-nighter. Knowing Kenji, he probably had. Tell me you have good news, I said. I have interesting news, he replied, the clatter of his keyboard in the background. I finished the deep dive on Richard Sullivan's finances. It's worse than we thought. He has nearly $20 million in personal debt, all tied up with those shady private lenders. And the interest rates, Eleanor? Predatory. Some are hitting 18%. He's bleeding cash. Can he declare bankruptcy? I asked, already knowing the answer. Not without losing everything, Kenji said. His personal guarantee on the Sullivan Holdings loans means if the LLC defaults, they can go after his personal assets. His houses, his cars, his art collection, and there's a clause in his partnership agreement that penalizes him severely for personal bankruptcy. It's a designed trap. A trap. Of course it was. Richard Sullivan hadn't just built an empire. He had built a cage for himself. Send me the full report, I said. And Kenji? Find out who those lenders are. The real people behind the LLCs. I have a feeling they aren't who they seem to be. I hung up and immediately called Ray. He was already in his office, a war room of legal pads and case files. Kenji just confirmed, I said without preamble. Richard is buried. 20 million in personal debt. Leverage to the hilt. Ray let out a low whistle. That explains the wedding bill. He was trying to hide a line item to keep his creditors from calling in his debts. If they knew he was dropping tens of thousands on a party, they'd view him as unstable. Which is why he needs this to go away quietly, I mused. He needs Grayson to pay the bill to cover his tracks. And when Grayson couldn't, they came after me. This changes things, Ray said, his voice thoughtful. If Richard is facing financial collapse, he's more likely to cave. He'll pressure Grayson to settle to avoid a public spectacle that could trigger a default on his loans. Exactly, I said. So we use it. In the meeting with Gates, we don't just threaten Grayson. We threaten the entire Sullivan empire. We make it clear that if this goes to trial, Richard's financial house of cards collapses. Sounds like a plan, Ray said. I'll be there at 1:30. We walk in together. I spent the next few hours prepping my opening arguments. I wasn't just going to sit there and listen to Gates' posture. I was going to dictate the terms of the conversation. I printed out copies of the key documents, the wire transfer receipts, the photo of the bracelet, the transcript of the video call, and most importantly, a summary of Kenji's financial report on Richard. I organized them into a sleek black leather binder, a gift from Grayson on our 10th anniversary, now repurposed as a tool of his ruin. At 1:15 p.m., I left the hotel. The midtown air was thick with humidity, a stark contrast to the crisp, conditioned air of my suite. I walked the 10 blocks to Gates and Associates, my heels clicking on the pavement in a rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. It wasn't nervousness. It was focus. Gates's office was on the 15th floor of a skyscraper on Madison Avenue, all polished wood, modern art, and views that cost more per month than my rent in Chicago. Her assistant, a severe-looking woman with a bun so tight it looked painful, escorted us into the conference room. Teresa Gates was already there, sitting at the head of a long mahogany table. She was a formidable presence, tall and angular, with a sharp gray bob and a suit that probably cost more than my car. She didn't stand to greet us, just inclined her head slightly, her eyes assessing me with the cold calculation of a surgeon. Mr. Sterling, Miss Blake, she said, her voice as smooth as ever. Please, sit. Ray and I sat across from her. There was no one else in the room. No junior associates, no paralegals. This was a private summit. Let's not waste time with pleasantries, Gates started, folding her hands on the table. My client is willing to offer a settlement. He will agree to a division of assets as outlined in the prenuptial agreement, with a modest increase in alimony. In exchange, Miss Blake agrees to drop all allegations of infidelity and financial misconduct and signs a mutual non-disparagement agreement. I smiled. It was a practiced, hollow gesture. That's generous, Miss Gates. Truly. But that's not why we're here. Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me? We're not here to negotiate a settlement based on the prenup, I said, opening my binder and sliding the first document across the table. It was the summary of Richard's financial exposure. We're here to discuss the dissolution of the marriage and the division of marital assets, which, thanks to your client's actions, are now significantly more complex. Gates glanced at the paper, her expression unreadable, then looked at Ray. Is this some kind of joke? This is about Richard Sullivan, not Grayson. Actually, Ray said, his voice calm and steady, it's very much about Grayson. Grayson is the heir apparent to the Sullivan empire. If that empire collapses under a mountain of debt and fraud investigations, what is Grayson's net worth? What is his future earning potential? And more importantly, what does that do to his ability to pay the legal fees you're racking up? Gates's jaw tightened. She knew we were right. I slid another document across the table, the transcript of the video call. And then there's this. A candid conversation between your client and his companion. It's quite illuminating. Especially the part where he admits to financial difficulties and calls her a gold digger. I'm sure a jury would find that charming. Gates didn't touch the paper. She just stared at it, her knuckles white. I placed the final document on the pile, the motion to freeze assets. And finally, this, which we will file with the court tomorrow morning if we don't reach a satisfactory resolution today. We have evidence of a pattern of dissipating marital assets, Miss Gates. We will freeze every account, every property, every investment vehicle tied to Grayson Sullivan. He won't be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone pay your retainer. For the first time since we sat down, Teresa Gates looked uncertain. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes darting between me and Ray. The icy composure was cracking. My client, he doesn't want this to go to trial, she said, her voice losing some of its previous confidence. He wants this over. So do I said, leaning forward. Which is why I'm offering a solution. Grayson agrees to a full and unconditional waiver of the prenuptial agreement. We split the marital assets 50-50, and he pays my legal fees. In exchange, I agree not to file criminal charges against him or his father. Gates laughed, but it was a hollow sound. You can't be serious. An equal split? He'll be left with nothing. He'll be left with his life, I countered. And his freedom. Because if this goes to trial, Miss Gates, I won't just present this evidence in civil court. I'll hand it over to the district attorney, the SEC, and the IRS. Your client will face criminal charges. Is that the outcome you want for him? The room fell silent. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. Gates stared at me for a long, long time. Then slowly, she gathered the papers, stacking them neatly. I need to speak with my client. Of course, Ray said, standing up. We'll be in the hall. We stepped out of the conference room, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind us. Ray turned to me, a grin breaking across his face. That was brutal and magnificent. I meant every word. I said, the adrenaline finally starting to recede, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. He has until the end of the day. We didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, Gates emerged. Her face was a mask of professional detachment, but her eyes were cold. She had lost this round. He will agree to your terms, she said, her voice dry. With one addition, the non-disparagement agreement is non-negotiable. I smiled. Done. We shook hands. The deal was sealed. As we walked out of the building and onto the bustling street, the midday sun felt different. Warmer, brighter. The war wasn't over. There would be battles over the details, over the wording of the final decree, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. I looked up at the towering skyscrapers, the glass and steel that symbolized the world I was about to re-enter. I was no longer an outsider looking in. I was a player, a force to be reckoned with. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You think you won? You have no idea what's coming. I smiled and blocked the number. Let them threaten. Let them posture. It was all they had left. I was walking away with my dignity, my freedom, and my future. And they were left with a pile of debt, a crumbling empire, and a lifetime of regret. I made the first move. They made the last. And it was checkmate. The settlement was sealed, but the war wasn't over. It was just entering a new, more vicious phase. The next few hours were a whirlwind of legal documents, conference calls, and strategic maneuvering. Ray and his team worked nonstop, drafting the settlement agreement with the precision of bomb disposal technicians. One wrong word, one ambiguous clause, and the whole thing could blow up in our faces. I, meanwhile, became a ghost. I stopped answering calls from unknown numbers. I deactivated my social media accounts. I even had the hotel route my room calls straight to voicemail. My only communication was with Ray and Kenji. I was operating in the shadows, a general directing her troops from a secure bunker. The terms of the settlement were brutal for Grayson, exactly as I intended. The prenup was rendered null and void. The marital assets, which now included the Soho penthouse, a significant portion of his startup's profits, and various investment accounts, would be split equally. He was also responsible for covering my legal fees, a sum already climbing into the six figures. And as an exquisite final touch, he had to personally guarantee the $50,000 wedding bill, removing my name from the contract entirely. The only concession I made was the non-disparagement agreement. I wouldn't badmouth him publicly, and he wouldn't badmouth me. It was a small price to pay for the financial devastation I was about to unleash. Besides, the best revenge isn't a loud scream. It's the quiet, satisfied smile you wear when your enemy realizes they've lost. On the morning of the third day, Ray called me with an update. He signed it, he said, the exhaustion evident in his voice. Just a few minutes ago. Teresa Gates is drafting the final paperwork for the judge's signature. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it made my knees weak. I sank into the nearest chair, my hand pressed hard against my chest. It was over. The legal battle was won. And Richard? I asked. Strangely quiet, Ray said. I think the news about his financial troubles spooked him more than anything. He's backing down. He knows if he pushes, we expose everything. Good, I said. So now it's just Grayson. Just Grayson, Ray confirmed, and he's not taking it well. Gates said he was emotional. She practically had to hold his hand to make him sign. I smiled. Emotional. That was one word for it. The final decree was signed by the judge that afternoon. It was a done deal. Grayson Sullivan was officially a divorced man, and he was walking away with half of what he brought into the marriage, half of his future, and half of his pride. I expected him to disappear. To slink back to his world of startups and socialites, licking his wounds and planning his next move. I expected a text, maybe a nasty email, but nothing more. I was wrong. He came to the hotel. I was in the lobby, checking out, my few belongings packed into a single suitcase. I had decided to move to a temporary loft in Dumbo, Brooklyn, a place I had found online that screamed, independent, successful woman. Exactly the image I wanted to project. That was when I saw him. He was standing by the revolving doors, arms crossed, jaw tight. He looked like a wreck. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair was a mess, and his expensive suit was wrinkled, like he had slept in it. He looked older, smaller. The Grayson Sullivan the first had known. The confident, charismatic VC was gone. In his place was a defeated, bitter man. Our eyes met across the expanse of the marble lobby. He pushed through the doors, walking toward me with a purpose that made my stomach tighten. Eleanor, he said, his voice raspy. We need to talk. I think we're done talking, Grayson, I said, keeping my voice calm and level. I nodded to the bellhop, who was holding my luggage. I'm checking out. You can't do this, he hissed, grabbing my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. You can't just abandon us. Gently but firmly, I removed his hand. There is no us, Grayson. There hasn't been for a long time. The judge just signed the papers. We are legally strangers. This is insane, he yelled, drawing the attention of the concierge and a few lingering guests. You're throwing away 12 years of marriage over a stupid wedding bill and a midlife crisis. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the tension. A midlife crisis? Is that what you're calling it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're having a very public meltdown. Because your wife finally grew a spine. He lunged at me again, but this time the bellhop stepped in, his hand resting protectively on my suitcase. Sir, is there a problem here? Grayson glared at the young man, then turned his fury back to me. You think you won? You think this settlement makes you the winner? You won a Pyrrhic victory, Eleanor. You destroyed the family. You embarrassed my father. You alienated everyone who matters to us. Us, I repeated, my voice dropping to a whisper. There is no us, Grayson. There hasn't been for years. You made sure of that when you chose your father's approval over your wife's love. When you chose that girl over your marriage. Her name is Iris, he roared, his face turning purple. And she supports me more in one day than you did in 12 years. I smiled, a cold, hard smile that I knew would cut him to the bone. Does she support you? Or is she just ambitious? Because from where I'm standing, she seems more interested in your money than your heart. And, speaking of money, I pulled out my phone, my finger hovering over a single button. I just wanted to show you one more thing before I go. A little memento of our marriage. I hit play. The video of the Soho penthouse him and Iris arguing started playing. The audio wasn't great, but his voice was unmistakable. You're nothing but a gold digger anyway. You're lucky I even look at you. The color drained from his face. He stared at my phone, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. How did you get that? He stammered. I have my ways, I said, slippered it yet. But if you ever come near me again, if you ever try to harass me or drag my name through the mud, that video goes public, along with the financial records and the IRS report. Are we understood? He just stared at me, his eyes wide with a mix of hatred and terror. I turned to the bellhop. I'm ready. As I walked past Grayson, I paused for a second. I leaned in close so only he could hear me. The wedding bill is paid, by the way, I murmured. Out of your half of the settlement. Consider it a final gift from your wife. Goodbye, Grayson. I walked out of the hotel and into the bright, unforgiving light of a New York afternoon. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel his eyes on me, burning into my back like a brand. The war was over. The battle for my future had just begun. And as I slid into the back of the taxi that would take me to my new life, I allowed myself a single, triumphant thought. I had won. And the best part? He had no one to blame but himself. The taxi ride to my new loft in Dumbo was a surreal experience. I stared out the window at the familiar streets of New York, seeing them with new eyes. This wasn't the city I visited as a tourist, or flew into as a pretty wife on her husband's arm. This was my city now. A city of opportunity, of sharp edges, of people who wouldn't blink if you cried on the subway because they were too busy fighting their own battles. I liked that. I liked the anonymity, the meritocracy. My phone buzzed. A text from Ray. Settlement recorded. Grayson just left my office. Looked like he got hit by a bus. You were right. He won't be a problem anymore. I smiled and typed back a single word. Good. Then I silenced the phone and dropped it into my bag. I didn't want any more distractions. I had a new home to organize, a new life to build, and a new career to launch. The past was dead, buried under the weight of legal documents and a final decisive victory. The apartment was everything I had hoped for. It was a top-floor loft space-exposed brick, polished concrete floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the East River and the Manhattan skyline. It was unfurnished, which suited me perfectly. I wanted to fill it with pieces I chose, things that represented me, not us. Over the next week, that's exactly what I did. I scoured design studios and antique markets, curating a collection of furniture that was modern, comfortable, and unapologetically expensive. A sleek gray sectional sofa, a vintage Eames lounge chair, a dining table made of reclaimed walnut. I hired a contractor to install a state-of-the-art home office, complete with a massive monitor, a top-tier printer, and a custom-built bookcase that stretched from floor to ceiling. It was my sanctuary, my fortress, and it was perfect. I also reactivated my New York State bar license. It was a simple process, some forms and a fee, but it felt monumental. I was no longer Eleanor Sullivan, ex-wife. I was Eleanor Blake, attorney at law. I reached out to a few former colleagues at Sterling and Pierce, and within days I had several offers for freelance legal consulting work. It wasn't a partner track position, no, But it was a start. It was income. It was independence. One afternoon, about a week after moving in, I was at a coffee shop near my apartment reviewing a contract for a tech startup when I felt a chill on the back of my neck, the distinct sensation of being watched. I looked up from my laptop, and my blood ran cold. Across the street, standing in the shadow of a doorway, was Iris. She looked different. The carefully constructed veneer of the other woman was gone, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated anxiety. Her hair was messy, her clothes were wrinkled, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She was staring at me with an intensity that was almost frightening. I held her gaze for a long moment. Then I calmly closed my laptop and stood up. I crossed the street, my heels clicking on the pavement, and stopped a few feet from her. "Can I help you, Iris?" I asked, my voice cold and distant. She flinched as if my voice was a physical blow. "I need to talk to you," she stammered, her eyes darting nervously. "It's about Grayson." "I don't discuss Grayson," I said, making a move to step past her. "We have nothing left to say to each other. Please." She cried, grabbing my arm. Her grip was desperate. "You have to help me. He's lost his mind." I stopped, turning back to face her. I allowed a flicker of curiosity to show on my face. "Lost what?" "Everything," she hissed, her eyes filling with tears. "The money, the investors, his mind. He's been drinking nonstop since the divorce was finalized. He's talking about suicide. He says it's all your fault." Gently, I removed her hand from my arm. "Suicide. Is that what he's telling you? How convenient. It's true," she insisted. "He's spiraling, and I'm trapped in the middle of it. He won't let me leave. He says if I go, he'll kill himself." I studied her for a moment. She was trembling, her eyes wild with a mix of fear and resentment. Either she was a brilliant actress, or she was genuinely terrified. And if she was terrified, it meant Grayson was more dangerous than I had thought. But I wasn't her savior. I wasn't her therapist. I was the woman she had helped destroy. "I'm sorry to hear that, Iris," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. "But that is between you and Grayson. It is no longer my problem. It is your problem." She shrieked, drawing the attention of a passing couple. "You did this to him! You ruined him!" I smiled, a cold, hard smile that I knew would cut her to the bone. "No, Iris." I just held up a mirror. He didn't like what he saw, so he broke it. Don't blame me for the consequences of his own actions. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing on the Brooklyn street sobbing. But her words stayed with me. Grayson was spiraling, talking about suicide. It was a classic tactic of the guilty and desperate, a way to manipulate, to control, to elicit sympathy. And if he was manipulating Iris, who else was he trying to manipulate? The court? The media? I pulled out my phone and dialed Ray's number. "Ray," I said when he answered. "It's Eleanor. I just had a visit from Iris." I recounted the encounter, her claims about Grayson's instability and his suicide threats. "Damn it," Ray said, his voice grim. "I was hoping he'd just fade away. This complicates things. He's trying to play the victim," I said, painting me as the villain who drove him to despair. "We need to be prepared for that." "We are," Ray assured me. "I'll have our investigator look into it, see if there's any truth to his threats. But Eleanor, be careful. A man like Grayson, when he feels he has nothing left to lose, is capable of anything." I hung up the phone, a knot of unease forming in my stomach. Ray was right. I had won the legal battle, but the war wasn't over. It had entered a new, more dangerous phase. I looked up at my new building, the glass and steel that housed my new life. It was a fortress, but would it be strong enough? I pushed the thought away. I had survived Richard. I had survived Grayson. I would survive this. I was Eleanor Blake, and I was not afraid. I walked into my building, the doorman holding the door for me with a polite nod. I rode the elevator to the top floor, the silence a welcome balm after the chaos of the street. As I unlocked my door and stepped into my pristine, empty apartment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to live in fear. I wasn't going to let Grayson's instability dictate my life. I was going to fight back. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and started typing. I was drafting a new document, one that would preempt any attempt by Grayson to manipulate the narrative. It was a cease and desist notice, not for him, but for the media. It stated in no uncertain terms that any false or defamatory statements made about me by Grayson Sullivan or his associates would be met with swift and decisive legal action. I would not be a victim. I would be a bulwark. I printed the letter and signed it with a flourish. Then I scanned it and emailed it to every major news outlet in New York. Let him try to play the victim. I was ready for him. The game had just changed, and I intended to win. The cease and desist notice was like a warning shot across the bow. It was professional, impersonal, and entirely devastating in its implications. I wasn't just defending myself. I was going on the offensive. And the media, smelling blood in the water, began to circle. The first story broke 2 days later. It was a small piece in page 6, buried in the society pages. Sullivan divorce takes dark turn. Ex-wife issues gag order. It quoted sources close to the matter, who described my letter as aggressive and unnecessary. But the piece also noted that Grayson Sullivan had been conspicuously silent since the divorce was finalized, fueling speculation about his mental and financial state. Then came the real blow. It was a Wednesday morning. I was in my home office reviewing a complex licensing agreement for a software company when the news alert flashed on my screen. Breaking. Tech entrepreneur Grayson Sullivan faces fraud allegations amidst ongoing family feud. My heart stopped. I clicked the link. The story, published by a major business journal, was a bombshell. It detailed the allegations of financial misconduct that had been circulating in legal circles, linking them directly to Grayson's now-defunct startup, Ether Technologies. The article alleged that Grayson had misrepresented the company's user acquisition costs to investors, artificially inflating the valuation prior to its sale. The source of the leak was anonymous, but the details were too specific to be anything other than an inside job. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. This wasn't my doing. I hadn't spoken to the press. I hadn't leaked a single document, which meant someone else had. Someone who wanted to see Grayson burn just as much as I did. Richard? No. Richard was too preoccupied protecting his own skin. He wouldn't risk bringing this kind of scrutiny to the family name, which left only one other person, Iris. It made sense. She was desperate, cornered, and looking for a way out. Turning on Grayson was her only play, and she had chosen the one arena where he was most vulnerable, his professional reputation. I picked up my phone and dialed Ray's number. "Did you see it?" he asked before I could even say hello. "I saw it," I said, my voice tight. "It wasn't us." "I know," he said, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "But it helps our case immensely. The SEC is going to have to open an investigation now. And with that kind of scrutiny, any hope he had of a soft landing is gone." He was right. This changed everything. Grayson wasn't just a divorced man with a drinking problem. He was a potential fraudster facing federal charges. His stock, both personal and professional, had just plummeted. Over the next 24 hours, the story exploded. Major newspapers and news networks picked it up. Grayson's name was trending on Twitter. His LinkedIn profile investors, the ones he had lied to, were issuing statements of deep concern. And Grayson, he remained silent, completely silent. His social media accounts went dormant. His phone went straight to voicemail. He was a ghost. Until he wasn't. He showed up at my building at 9 p.m. that night. I knew he was there before the doorman even buzzed me. I could feel him, a malignant presence radiating from the street below. "Miss Blake." The doorman's voice crackled over the intercom. "There's a gentleman here to see you. Says it's urgent." I looked at the security feed on my tablet. There he was, Grayson. He looked like a shadow of his former self. Thin, disheveled, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He was pacing back and forth in front of the building, muttering to himself. "Ignore him," I said. "And if he causes any trouble, call the police." "Yes, ma'am." I clicked off the intercom and walked to my window, looking down at him. He was staring up at my building, his face a mask of anguish and rage. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed. I could see him screaming into the device, his face contorted with fury. My own phone rang a second later. Unknown number. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. Then a text came through. "It was you bitch. I'm going to destroy you. I swear to God, I'm going to annihilate you." I smiled and blocked the number. Let him scream, let him threaten. It was the sound of a drowning man. The next morning, the story took another turn. The New York Post ran a segment, this time with a bombshell photo. It was Grayson stumbling out of a bar in the Lower East Side, his arm wrapped around a woman who was definitely not Iris. The caption read, "Sullivan's latest meltdown. From fraud allegations to bar brawls." The woman in the photo was young, blonde, and looked strangely familiar. I did a reverse image search and found her in seconds. Her name was something generic, and she was a struggling actress who had been posting photos with Grayson on her Instagram for months, long before the divorce was even finalized. He hadn't just cheated on me with Iris. He had been living a double, triple, quadruple life. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. I forwarded the photo to Ray. His response was succinct. "Game over. He's done." Ray was right. This was the final nail in the coffin. The prenup was void. The settlement agreement was final. And now his own actions were destroying his reputation beyond repair. There was nothing left to fight for. Nothing left to win. Except, perhaps, one last thing. That afternoon, I received a formal letter from Teresa Gates's office. It was a request for a final good faith settlement conference to discuss the disposition of remaining marital assets. It was a formality, a desperate last attempt by Grayson to salvage something from the wreckage. I agreed to the meeting, not because I thought there was anything left to negotiate, but because I wanted to see him one last time. I wanted to look into his eyes and see the man he had become. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. I spent the days leading up to it preparing not my legal arguments, but my exit strategy. I finalized my plans to return to Chicago. My consulting work was drying up. The novelty of my victory was fading. It was time to go home, to rebuild my life in a place where the air didn't reek of ambition and betrayal. On the day of the meeting, I wore my armor. The same charcoal gray suit from the first meeting with Gates. I arrived at her office with Ray by my side. Grayson was already there. He looked worse than he had on the street. He was twitchy, his hands shaking, his eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. He couldn't meet my gaze. Gates, to her credit, looked exhausted. This case had taken a toll on her as well. She was no longer the icy, confident opponent she had been. She was just a lawyer trying to clean up the mess her client had made. The meeting was a farce. Grayson mumbled through a series of nonsensical arguments, blaming everyone but himself for his predicament. He accused me of leaking the story to the Post. He accused Iris of stealing from him. He even accused his own father of sabotaging him. He was unhinged. Finally, I'd had enough. I stood up, signaling the end of the charade. "Miss Gates," I said, my voice cutting through the fog of Grayson's rambling. "It is clear your client is in no condition to engage in productive negotiations. We are ending this meeting. Eleanor, wait." Grayson yelled, jumping up from his chair. "You can't do this. You haven't heard my proposal. I've heard enough," I said, gathering my papers. "Your proposal, such as it is noted and rejected. Goodbye, Grayson." I turned and walked toward the door. He lunged at me, his hand reaching out to grab my arm. "No," he screamed. "You're not walking away. You're not taking everything from me." Ray stepped in, his large frame easily blocking Grayson's path. "That's enough, Mr. Sullivan. Sit down." Grayson stumbled back, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "I'll make you pay for this," he hissed. "I swear to God, I'll make you pay." I smiled, a cold, hard smile that I knew would haunt him. "You already have, Grayson. You already have." I walked out of that office for the last time, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The war was over. Grayson Sullivan was a broken man, and I, Eleanor Blake, was finally free. I stepped out of the building and into the bright, unforgiving light of a New York afternoon. The air was crisp, the sky was blue, and the future was mine. I hailed a cab and gave the driver my new address. It was time to go home. The silence in my Dumbo loft was a living thing. It had been 3 days since the disastrous meeting with Grayson and Teresa Gates. 3 days of no news, no threats, no drunken voicemails. Just the low hum of the city outside my windows, and the quiet ticking of the clock on my wall. It was the silence of a battlefield after the guns had fallen quiet, a deceptive calm that suggested the war was truly over. I was packing, not unpacking, as one might do in a new home, but packing. My consulting work had run its course. The well of sympathy and morbid interest in the New York legal scene having dried up. The story of the scorned wife who took down her cheating husband was old news. It was time to go home. I had booked a flight back to Chicago for the following week. My one-way ticket lay on the kitchen counter, a tangible symbol of my escape. I was boxing up my books, the smell of old paper and ink a comfort, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, a local New York area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something a shiver of unease, a sixth sense honed by months of paranoia made me answer. Hello, Eleanor. The voice was female, breathless, and unfamiliar. It's Martha. Martha Sullivan. I froze, a half-filled cardboard box in my hands. Martha. Grayson's younger sister. The bride. The one who had sent me that pathetic "you're ruining my wedding" text weeks ago. I hadn't heard from her since. Martha. I said, my voice carefully neutral. This is a surprise. Please, she gasped, and I could hear the tears in her voice. You have to help me. It's Dad. My blood ran cold. What about your father? He had a heart attack last night. He's at Mount Sinai. He's alive, but it's bad, Eleanor. Really bad. I sank into the nearest chair. The phone pressed hard against my ear. Richard Sullivan, the patriarch. The man who had started this entire chain of events with his cruel rejection at the wedding gate. He was dying. Why are you calling me, Martha? I asked, my mind racing. This was a trap. It had to be a ploy to get me to the hospital, to ambush me, to force some kind of reconciliation. Because you're the only one who can fix this? She sobbed, her grief and desperation overflowing. The doctors say he needs immediate surgery. It's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money he doesn't have. The IRS is freezing his assets. The banks are calling in his loans. He's going to lose everything. The house, the business, everything. And if he loses the business, he loses his health insurance. And he can't pay for the surgery. Please, Eleanor, I'm begging you. You have to talk to him. The pieces clicked together with a sickening snap. Richard's financial empire was crumbling. The IRS audit, the predatory loans, the public fallout from the divorce, it had all been too much. His heart attack wasn't just a medical event. It was the physical manifestation of a life built on lies and greed finally collapsing in on itself. I don't understand, Martha, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. Why would I help him after everything he did? Because he's my father, she cried, her desperation raw. And whether you like it or not, he's still your father-in-law. And if he dies, the family is finished. Grayson will be destitute. I'll be ruined. Please, Eleanor. Just come to the hospital. Talk to him. That's all I ask. I closed my eyes, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over me. Pity for a man who had built his life on a foundation of sand. Satisfaction that justice, in its twisted way, was finally being served. And beneath it all, a cold, hard core of resolve. This was no longer my fight. I'll come to the hospital. I finally said. Thank you, Martha whispered, a flood of relieved sobs breaking over the line. Thank you so much. We're in the cardiology wing, 4th floor. Please hurry. I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long moment. Then I stood up, walked to my closet, and pulled out a black dress. It was a somber, elegant piece, the one I had bought for the funeral I knew was coming. I just hadn't expected it to be Richard's. Mount Sinai was a hive of fluorescent-lit anxiety. The antiseptic smell of sickness was a physical presence. I found the cardiology wing and walked down the sterile corridor, my low heels clicking on the linoleum. Room 704 was at the end of the hall. I could hear voices before I even reached it. Martha's, high and frantic, and another, lower, familiar voice. Grayson. I paused outside the door, taking a deep breath before pushing it open. The room was a tableau of pain and resentment. Richard was propped up in the hospital bed, looking small and frail beneath the white sheets, a maze of tubes and wires snaking from his body to various machines. His face was gray, his eyes sunken. He looked every bit of his 68 years. Martha was sitting beside his bed, wiping her eyes with a tissue, and Grayson was standing by the window, staring out at the city with a dark, brooding scowl. They all turned to look at me when I entered. Eleanor, Martha whispered, her voice hoarse. Thank you for coming. Richard's eyes met mine. There was no recognition in them, no plea for forgiveness, just a cold, hard assessment. Even on his deathbed, he was trying to maintain control. Grayson didn't say a word. He just glared at me, his jaw tight with undisguised hatred. I came as soon as I heard, I said, my voice calm and professional. I walked over to the bed, avoiding Grayson's stare. Richard, I'm sorry to see you like this. He tried to speak, but a fit of coughing seized him, shaking his frail body. Martha stood up to help him, but he waved her away, his eyes never leaving mine. When the coughing subsided, he managed to croak out a single word: money. It was a command, not a request. I know about the money, Richard, I said, keeping my voice low. I know about the IRS. I know about the loans. I know you're facing foreclosure on the house and bankruptcy for the business. He closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. It was the closest to a surrender I would ever get from him. I can help you, I said. Both Grayson and Martha gasped. I raised a hand to silence them. But not in the way you think. I turned to face Grayson, who was looking at me with a mix of hope and suspicion. The money for the surgery. The money to keep the house. It will not come from me, I stated, my voice ringing with finality. It will come from the sale of the East Hampton estate. The East Hampton estate? Grayson stammered. That's worth millions. You can't. I can, I interrupted, pulling a folded document from my bag. And I will, because it's the only asset not tied up in the family trusts or the failing LLCs. It's in Richard's personal name. And according to the terms of our divorce settlement, which was based on the invalidated prenup, that property is now part of the marital estate, which was split equally. My half of the proceeds will more than cover your father's medical expenses and the outstanding debts on the house. I tossed the document onto the bed, where it landed with a soft thud. It was the final divorce decree, the section detailing the division of assets highlighted in yellow. You would do that? Martha whispered, her eyes wide in disbelief. I'm not doing it for you, I said, my gaze sweeping from Martha to Richard, and finally to Grayson. I'm doing it as a matter of principle. A debt is a debt, and this family owes me a great deal. This is how you pay it. Richard's eyes fluttered open. He looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time since I had walked in, there was no gratitude there, just a cold, hard acceptance. He knew he had lost. He knew his empire was crumbling, and he knew I was the one holding the wrecking ball. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. I turned to leave, but Grayson's voice stopped me. Eleanor, wait. I looked back. He seemed smaller than I had ever seen him, his bravado stripped away, leaving only a hollow, bitter man. Are you really going through with this? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Are you going to sell the house? Are you going to take everything? I'm not taking everything, Grayson. I'm not taking everything. I said, my voice softening just a fraction. I'm taking what's mine, and in the process, I'm saving the life of the man who tried to destroy me. If that isn't a victory, I don't know what is. I walked out of that hospital room, leaving the ghosts of my past behind. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The war was over. The final casualty had just been tallied, and I, Eleanor Blake, was finally, truly free. I stepped out of the hospital and into the bright, unforgiving light of a New York afternoon. My flight to Chicago was in 3 days. It was time to go home. The silence of my loft felt different now. It wasn't the tense, expectant silence of a battlefield before the storm. It was the hollow silence of a graveyard. Richard Sullivan was still alive, but the man I had known, the real estate titan, the arrogant patriarch, had died in that hospital bed. What remained was a husk, kept alive by machines and morphine, waiting for the inevitable. I spent the next 2 days in a state of numb productivity. I finalized my flight plans, confirming my one-way ticket to O'Hare. I handled the sale of the East Hampton property, signing the papers electronically and transferring my half of the proceeds into a special account I had set up for Richard's medical expenses. I didn't do it for him. I did it for me. It was the final act of separation, a way to ensure the last tie binding me to that family was severed with a clean, surgical cut. On my last night in New York, I received a single text message. It was from an unknown number, but I knew who it was. He's gone. 11:47 p.m. He went late. There was no name, no sentiment, just a timestamp and a curse. It was classic Grayson. Even in death, he couldn't muster an ounce of genuine human emotion. He was a creature of spite to the bitter end. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The city was still asleep. The only sounds were the distant rumble of a garbage truck and the lonely wail of a siren. I dressed in comfortable clothes, jeans, a black sweater, boots, and brewed one last cup of coffee in my pristine, empty kitchen. I looked around the loft one final time. The furniture I had so carefully chosen was gone, sold or donated. The walls were bare. The space was clean, sterile, and ready for its next occupant, just like me. My taxi arrived at 6 a.m. sharp. The driver, a taciturn man, loaded my single suitcase into the trunk without a word. We drove through the waking city, the streets gradually filling with the morning hustle. I watched the familiar landmarks roll by: the Empire State Building, Washington Square Park, the gleaming skyscrapers of Midtown, each one a monument to a life I was leaving behind. At JFK, I checked my bag and breezed through security. The airport was a chaotic symphony of farewells and homecomings, a constant flow of people arriving and departing. I found my gate, B32, and sat down to wait. My American Airlines flight was scheduled to depart at 10:15 a.m., a direct flight to Chicago. It wasn't a long journey, maybe 2.5 hours, but I was looking forward to it. Looking forward to the vast expanse of the Midwest, to the literal and figurative distance it would put between me and my past. I was boarding with the first group of passengers when my phone, which I had turned back on, vibrated incessantly in my pocket. I ignored it, keeping it on silent as I walked down the jet bridge and into the belly of the plane. I found my seat, a window spot in premium economy, and stowed my carry-on in the overhead bin. I settled in, the hum of the aircraft engines a comforting white noise. As the plane pushed back from the gate, I took one last look at the city through the small, scratched window. The sun was rising over the horizon, painting the skyscrapers in shades of pink and gold. It was a beautiful sight, a fitting final image. And then we were in the air. The city shrank beneath us, becoming a toy town of miniature buildings and tiny streets. I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes, and allowed myself to drift. I didn't think about Grayson. I didn't think about Richard. I didn't think about the money, or the legal battles, or the years of humiliation. I thought about the future. I thought about the law firm I would join in Chicago, the cases I would take on, the life I would build for myself, careful brick by careful brick. I was Eleanor Blake. And I was finally, truly, going home. The plane leveled off, and the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming us aboard and announcing our cruising altitude. I opened my eyes, looked out the window, and saw nothing but a sea of clouds stretching to the horizon. It was a blank canvas, and I intended to make the most of it. A flight attendant walked by with a beverage cart. I ordered a glass of sparkling water with lime. As she handed it to me, she smiled. "Heading home?" "Yes," I said, taking a sip of the crisp, bubbly liquid. "Going back to Chicago." I raised my glass to the empty seat beside me. A silent toast to the woman I had been, the woman I had become, and the woman I was yet to be. The journey was just beginning, and this time, I was flying solo. 6 months later, the air in Chicago was different. It was biting, crisp, tinged with the smell of Lake Michigan and roasted nuts from street vendors. It was the smell of home. I had forgotten how much I missed it. My return to Sterling and Pierce's Chicago headquarters had been seamless, almost anticlimactic. Ray Sterling had called ahead, of course, singing my praises and ensuring my old corner office was waiting for me, clean and ready. Within a week, I was back in action, arguing cases in court, mentoring junior associates, and doing what I did best, winning. The story of my New York divorce had preceded me, of course. It had been juicy gossip in the Midwestern legal community for weeks, but here, it was just that, a story. A dramatic chapter in the life of a brilliant litigator who had taken a brief detour. It didn't define me. It was just a footnote. Tonight, however, I wasn't in a courtroom. I was at the Art Institute of Chicago for the annual charity gala of the Lawyers for Education Foundation. I was on the committee, and it was my job to schmooze the donors, many of whom were former clients or rival attorneys. I was good at it. I wore a sleek emerald green gown that hugged my curves, and a smile that was simultaneously professional and enigmatic. I was deep in conversation with a state Supreme Court judge, discussing a recent ruling on intellectual property law, when I saw him. He was across the room, standing next to a sculpture, looking like he had wandered into the wrong party. He was alone. It was also, undeniably, Grayson Sullivan. My first instinct was to turn away, to ignore him. But that wasn't my style. I had spent too many years being the one who looked away. I excused myself from the judge with a gracious smile and wove through the crowd toward him. He saw me coming. His face, which had been slack with boredom, tightened into a mask of his old, familiar arrogance. But I saw the cracks. The lines around his eyes were deeper. The skin on his neck was loose. He had lost weight, and not in a good way. He looked like a man who had been put through the spin cycle of a washing machine. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a poor imitation of his old, confident tone. He raised a glass of what looked like cheap, sparkling wine. "What a coincidence seeing you here." "Grayson," I replied, my voice cold and steady. "I didn't know you were in Chicago." "I'm not," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "Just visiting. Business. Business." The word rang hollow coming from his lips. I wondered what kind of business a disgraced, unemployed tech CEO could possibly have in Chicago. "Selling was your father?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Richard Sullivan had passed away a month after I left New York. His death certificate listed cardiac arrest as the cause. The family had sold the East Hampton house to pay his medical bills and the mounting legal fees from the IRS investigation. The Sullivan empire was no more. "Gone," Grayson said, his voice dry. "3 months ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, and I meant it. Not for him, but for the complicated, flawed man who had been my father-in-law. He shrugged, a careless gesture that didn't fool me. "It is what it is. The will was a mess. The business is gone. The house is gone. Martha is living in a studio in Brooklyn, working as a barista. Can you believe that? A Sullivan. A barista." There was no grief in his voice, only resentment. Resentment that his sister had been reduced to honest work. "And you, Grayson?" I asked. "What brings you to Chicago?" He hesitated, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. Then he leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that reeked of desperation. "I'm exploring opportunities in the Midwest tech market. It's the next frontier, you know. And I was hoping I could rely on your expertise." My expertise? The audacity of the man. He was asking the woman he cheated on, lied to, and tried to bankrupt for a job reference. "I'm afraid I can't help you, Grayson," I said, taking a step back. "My practice is focused exclusively on corporate litigation. And besides," I added, my smile sharpening to a razor edge, "I don't think the kind of opportunities you're looking for exist in the legal market." His face flushed a dull red. He opened his mouth to retort, but before he could say a word, a familiar voice cut through the air. "Eleanor! There you are!" I turned. Ray Sterling was walking toward us, looking dapper in a classic tuxedo. He was here as a guest of honor, a major donor to the literacy program. He stopped beside me, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back. It was a subtle gesture, but unmistakable. Ownership. "Ray," I said, my smile becoming genuine. "Right on time. Am I interrupting?" he asked, his eyes shifting to Grayson with a look of mild, professional distaste. He knew the whole story, of course. He had been my general and my confessor throughout the entire ordeal. "Not at all," Grayson said, his voice strained. He straightened up, trying to recover some semblance of his former authority. "Just catching up with an old friend." Ray arched an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware you and Eleanor were friends, Mr. Sullivan. Our records indicate a rather acrimonious professional relationship." Grayson's jaw tightened. He looked from Ray to me and back again, realizing he had been checkmated once more. "Right," he muttered. "Well, good seeing you, Eleanor." He drained his glass of cheap sparkling wine and spun on his heels, disappearing into the crowd. I watched him go, a small, sad part of me feeling a flicker of pity for the broken man he had become. But it was quickly extinguished. He had made his choices. He had lived by the sword, and he had died by it. Ray turned to me, his eyes gleaming. He's gone? Good. I can't stand that man. I laughed, a sound that was light and free. Neither can I. Ray offered me his arm. Shall we? The auction is about to begin. I took his arm, and we walked together into the main hall. The orchestra struck up a waltz, the strings swelling with a romantic, timeless melody. Ray led me onto the dance floor, his hand warm and firm on my waist. As we swayed to the music, I looked up at the crystal chandeliers, at the glittering crowd of Chicago's legal and artistic elite, at the man in my arms who was a friend, a colleague, and perhaps something more. I thought of the long, lonely flight back, the empty loft in Dumbo, the hospital room, the wedding gate, the $50,000 bill. It all felt like a lifetime ago. A nightmare from which I had finally awakened. I rested my head on Ray's shoulder, closing my eyes and breathing in the scent of his cologne. I was home. I was safe. I was free. And as the music swelled and the room spun around us, I allowed myself one final, silent thought. The last laugh wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A quiet, deep, and enduring sense of peace. And it was all mine. The waltz ended, the final notes hanging in the air like the last grains of sand in an hourglass. Applause rippled through the crowd, polite and formal. Ray released me, but his hand lingered lightly on my arm, a warm anchor in the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. Champagne? He asked, waving to a passing waiter. Please, I murmured. My eyes, however, weren't on the waiter. They were still tracking the ghost of Grayson Sullivan. He was near the exit now, his shoulders hunched, his empty glass clutched in his hand like a talisman. He hadn't found anyone to talk to. Of course he hadn't. He was a pariah in this world, a man whose reputation had preceded him not just to Chicago, but to the grave. A waiter offered me a flute of golden liquid. I took it, the delicate stem cool against my fingertips. I didn't drink. I just held it, watching the bubbles rise, thinking about the last time I had drunk champagne with Grayson. It had been at our engagement party 12 years ago. He had been so full of life then, so full of promise. We're going to build an empire together, Elle, he had whispered in my ear, his eyes shining with a conviction I had been foolish enough to believe. The empire had been built, and I had been the one to tear it down, bloody brick by bloody brick. Ray returned with his own glass and stood beside me. His presence was a comfortable silence. He didn't need to ask what I was looking at. He knew. You handled that well, he said finally. Better than I would have. I've had a lot of practice, I said, my voice devoid of bitterness. It was simply a statement of fact. With him, with his father, with the whole sordid mess. I finally took a sip of the champagne. It was dry, crisp, and absolutely delicious. A world away from the syrupy swill Grayson had been drinking, Grayson reached the double doors of the gallery. He paused, looking back one last time. His eyes met mine across the crowded room. For a brief second, the mask dropped. The arrogance, the resentment, the bravado, it all vanished, revealing the scared, hollow man underneath. He looked like a child who had been left behind at a bus station, alone, confused, terrified. Then he turned away, swallowed by the darkness of the Chicago night. He's someone else's problem now, Ray said quietly. Yes, I agreed. He is. That was the most liberating feeling of all. Grayson Sullivan was no longer a force in my life. He was a memory, a cautionary tale, a closed case. The rest of the night passed in a blur of speeches, auctions, and small talk. I was named Benefactor of the Year for my contributions to the literacy program, a title I accepted with a gracious smile and a humble speech, thanking my wonderful colleagues at Sterling and Pierce. I didn't mention the real reason I had thrown myself into charity work. The need to fill the sudden, gaping void in my life with something meaningful, something that helped people instead of hurting them. When Ray and I finally left the gallery, the city was quiet. Taxis were scarce. The buses ran on reduced schedules. The air was crisp and clean, washing away the smell of perfume and stale champagne. Ray's driver was waiting for us, a sleek black Mercedes idling by the curb. He opened the door, and we slid into the cool, leather-scented interior. Home, James, Ray said with a soft chuckle. As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked out the window at the sleeping city. The skyscrapers of the Loop were a necklace of glittering lights. It was a sight I had taken for granted for years, and one I was deeply grateful to have back. Eleanor, Ray said, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. He was looking at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the car. I've been thinking. Oh? I turned to face him, my guard going up instinctively. Ray was my friend, my mentor, but he was also a man. And men, in my experience, eventually wanted something. I've been thinking, he continued, that you've been back for 6 months. You've adapted beautifully. You're taking on the big cases again. You're happy. I am, I said, a note of caution in my voice. But you're also alone, he said, his words gentle but direct. And I don't think you were built to be alone. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The question I had both dreaded and anticipated since I returned. I'm not looking for a replacement, Ray, I said, my voice firm. Not after everything. I'm not offering a replacement, he said, his hand covering mine on the seat between us. His touch was warm, comforting. I'm offering a partnership, in every sense of the word. Professionally, certainly. But perhaps personally, too. He turned my hand palm up and traced a slow circle on my skin with his thumb. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was patient. It was respectful. It was everything Grayson's touch had never been. I don't know what that would look like, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. Neither do I, Ray confessed. But I'd like to find out together. No pressure, no expectations, just dinner. Next Tuesday, at my place, I make an incredible seafood risotto. I looked at him. Really looked at him. His kind eyes, his intelligent brow, the slight dimple in his chin when he smiled. He was a good man, a decent man. A man who had seen me at my absolute worst and still wanted to be part of my life. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a grand, sweeping passion. It was something far more valuable. It was real. It was solid. It was a foundation upon which to build a future, not a fantasy to escape into. I turned my hand over, intertwining my fingers with his. It felt right, natural, like coming home. Tuesday sounds perfect, I said. The smile that lit up his face was brighter than all the chandeliers in the gallery. He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my knuckles. The car slowed, pulling up to the curb in front of my building, a modern, glass-fronted high-rise in River North overlooking the city. My new home, my sanctuary. Ray didn't try to kiss me goodbye. He just squeezed my hand and let it go. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Ray, I said. And for the first time in a very, very long time, the words carried no trace of irony or sorrow. They were simply a wish for peace. I stepped out of the car and into my building, the doorman wishing me a cheerful good night. I rode the elevator to the penthouse, the silence a welcome balm after the noise of the gala. I unlocked my door and stepped into my apartment. It was dark, quiet, and smelled faintly of the lavender diffuser I kept by the entryway. I kicked off my heels, unzipped the emerald green gown, and let it pool on the floor like a discarded jewel. I stood there in my slip, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. I thought of Grayson, alone in a hotel room somewhere in this vast city, nursing his cheap sparkling wine and his broken dreams. I felt no malice, no triumph, just a profound sense of closure. The $50,000 bill was paid, the wedding was over, the marriage was dead, and I, Eleanor Blake, was finally, truly free. I walked over to my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new folder. I labeled it Future Cases. Then I shut down the computer and walked into my bedroom, shedding the last vestiges of the woman I had been, and slipping into the crisp, clean sheets as the woman I was yet to become. The last laugh wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a quiet, deep, and enduring sense